Stealing the Mind of America, How to Brace Against the Deceptions of the New World Order, a conference held in Vail, Colorado. Featuring Hal Lindsey, author of over 20 books, including The Late Great Planet Earth, selling more than 20 million copies worldwide. Chuck Missler, a Naval Academy graduate and former corporate executive who now publishes a monthly newsletter reaching over 35,000 subscribers. Don McAlvany, editor of a geopolitical financial intelligence newsletter analyzing global monetary, economic, and political developments and their effect on American lives, and a special AIDS update by popular author and lecturer D.A. Miller. The following presentation is by Don McAlvany, entitled Toward a Radical Socialist American Police State.
Well, let me tell you, I've had the privilege in my running around the country to share the platform with some exciting people. But I cannot recall being as excited as I personally am about tonight. Most of you probably know that for the better part of 20 years, one of the outstanding newsletters in the United States has been published by Don McAlvany. And I've followed the newsletter for years, but I had no idea what he's like personally, as you'll quickly find out. And so without embarrassing any further, I want you to just give him a very special warm welcome tonight. Don McAlvany.
Can I have any keep a copy of that? Good. Thank you, Chuck, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is a real privilege and an honor to be with you tonight. These are really exciting times in which we live. I think that these are perhaps the most exciting times that we could live in all of history, and I am thankful to my God that He's allowed me to live at this particular time in history, and I hope that you are as well. We are going to see things in the next 3 to 5 to 7 years that none of us have ever seen before. We are going into a period, I think, of challenge, of pressure, of difficulty, unlike anything that has ever happened in the history of the United States, perhaps in the history of the world. These are exciting times. I believe these are the times that could herald the return of our Lord Jesus Christ. These are times in which I think many things that are prophetical may be in the process of being fulfilled. And you're going to hear a lot from Hal and Chuck and Dorothy and myself and at this conference that hopefully will stimulate you to a stronger relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. We talk about a lot of things here today, and I will tell you that I've been involved in political battles and political wars for over 30 years, and I do believe that what we're looking at is a spiritual battle in this country every bit as much as a political battle. I believe that we are seeing the forces of darkness gather, and I think many of the things we'll talk about here this weekend, I'll talk about here this evening, are leading up to things that have been prophesied. I think if there is one way to describe the time we live in today, it is that we live in a great time of deception. I believe perhaps the greatest time of deception in all of world history. And I'm going to talk a lot about deception tonight. I'm going to talk a lot about some of the things that we're going to be facing. Some of the things that I will go into tonight will be very, very heavy. And I apologize in advance. These are not all going to leave you laughing. On the other hand, we have a God who is still in control of nations and of history and of our individual lives, and He's in control of all the things that we see happening in the world today. I think the call to Christians today is to get prepared. Get prepared spiritually, get prepared physically, get prepared in a lot of different ways, and we need to get busy. I believe we're going to lose most of our freedom in this country in the next 3 to 5 to 7 years if we do not make some major changes. Okay, I'd like to start out by giving you some principles. I'm going to put a lot of overlays up here tonight, and I'm probably going to go faster and faster as we move along, so please just bear with me. First principle is the majority is always wrong. I realize that some of us were taught growing up to follow the majority, but I would say that wherever you look, you'll find that most people going the wrong direction at the wrong time. On Wall Street, we call it the theory of contrary opinion. It says most people will buy at the top of the market and they'll sell at the bottom of the market. And that's not exactly the old-time formula for making money. We find the majority of the people were against Jesus Christ in His day. They shouted, "Crucify Him." We find the majority of the people throughout history going the wrong direction. So if you find yourself in a small minority and find yourself wherever you're from kind of feeling like a voice crying in the wilderness, that's okay. You're probably on the right side. Americans are perpetual optimists. We like good news. We don't like bad news. We don't like people who bring us bad news. This is called by psychologists the Pollyanna principle. Tell me what I want to know or don't tell me anything at all. Okay? And the American people don't want to be moved out of their comfort zone. They're very comfortable. Francis Schaeffer said that the 1990s would be a time when most people, especially Christians, would be interested in one thing: peace and personal affluence. Leave me alone, give me peace, let me do my own thing. So we have a group of people in this country that are very, very optimistic. I think that optimism will be shattered in the very near future. Okay, to win the battle for investment or any kind of survival, political survival, I assert you have to avoid being an optimist or a pessimist, but be a realist and look at things the way they really are. And we're going to look at things tonight and hopefully give a bit of a perspective on some things that are happening around our country today. Complacency is self-satisfaction accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies. Tremendous amount of complacency in our country today as to some of the things that we'll be talking about tonight and that you'll hear throughout the weekend. Complacency and apathy on the part of Christians is very, very thick indeed. In fact, I think you could cut it with a knife. We've had some 50 years almost of uninterrupted prosperity since the end of World War II, and I think that the American people in general and Christians in particular have become fat, dumb, and lazy and very, very complacent. And there are a group of people in our country, I think, who would like to destroy our freedom, our Constitution, our traditional way of life, and in fact our biblical foundations. And if we don't wake up Christians who are supposed to be the salt of the earth, then I think the prognosis for our country is not too positive. Always mistrust the obvious. There are many things happening in the world today that are not so obvious, and I think you have to look beyond what the politicians are telling you and what you're seeing on television if you want to know what's really going on. Jesus was asked in Matthew 24 by his disciples on the Mount of Olives. They said, "What's it going to be like? Tell us, when will this happen and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you." In the context of Matthew 24, he talks about being deceived 4 times. Okay, he talks about a time of great deception prior to his return, and I think we live in that time of great deception. Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming that I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed." By the way, there are 52 wars that are going on in some part of the world today, and certainly there are rumors of other wars. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still not come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famine and earthquakes in various places. I think we see some of these things happening today. All these things are the beginning of birth pangs, and I wonder if we are not in the beginning of the birth pang period right now. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and be put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. The title of my talk really tonight, and of a book that I'm trying to write right now, is The Coming Persecution of the Church in America. And I believe we are on the threshold of massive persecution of Christians in the United States today, and I'll touch on that a little bit more as we move along this evening. That time many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive, second time, and deceive many people. I've talked with friends who have come out of the underground church in Romania, who functioned there when the communists were still very much in control. And they've told me about how there were people that were deceived by other Christians and even deceived by pastors. And I think you will see this happening in the United States. In fact, I think we are moving towards a situation where many of us will function in an underground church in America if we really want to practice our faith. They will deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Then he goes on a little later and says, "For false Christs will arise, and false prophets will appear, and perform many signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible." Do you think it's possible for Christians to be deceived in this day? As I travel around the country and lecture and so forth, I see a tremendous number of Christians that are deceived as to what is happening in our country. A little later it says, "For learn the lessons from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and come out, you know that the summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened." Okay, that's in Matthew 24, and I think that's a pretty neat passage that has a lot of application in our day. Flipping over to 2 Thessalonians, 2nd chapter, verse 3, it says, "Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs." Do we live in a day of rebellion? I believe we really do. "And the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, as he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, and every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing." Again, we keep talking about the concept of deception. I believe we live in the greatest day and era of deception in perhaps all of world history right now. "They perish because they refuse to love the truth and so to be saved. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie." I believe that that describes America today. I believe that there is a tremendous blindness and delusion that is now falling on the American people, and I think that includes many Christians, and I believe that God is allowing it, in fact, is probably causing it. I believe a tremendous blindness and delusion is now falling across people, as I believe God's judgment has now begun on the United States of America, and I'll touch on that a little bit more as we move along. So we live in a day of deception. As I said at the beginning, always mistrust the obvious. Many things that are happening today are not as they appear. They are not what your television is telling you, what your politicians and so forth are preaching. Few events are spontaneous or accidental. Most are manipulated. And so I think if you don't understand that, you'll always have a hard time understanding what's going on in the world. There are powerful forces behind the scenes pulling the strings on the Bill and Hillary Clintons, probably on the George Bushes, and on most events that we see happening. So I believe that very few things are accidental. I think most are being manipulated. Global events are speeding up. I call it the acceleration factor. I'm not sure why. But I believe it's happening. We're seeing things move faster and faster. Things that used to take a decade can now happen in a year. Things that used to happen in a year can now happen in a matter of weeks. Things are moving very, very rapidly, so don't watch just what is happening, but watch the speed with which things are happening. I think this is probably another sign that we're moving towards the return of our Lord Jesus Christ in the whole latter-day scenario. The battle for world domination, and there is a battle for world domination, is a financial and a spiritual battle as well as a political battle. And I think if you want to understand the world we live in, you need to understand all three aspects of that battle. Next principle is politicians, monetary and economic authorities will lie without hesitation to protect their own interests. I know that may come as a surprise to some of you. You'd like to believe that all people are as honest as I hope you are, but it's not true. I primarily spend my time analyzing and speaking in the area of economic system. It was interesting to observe the Bush administration during this last campaign as they continually lied about the state of the U.S. economy. They lied about everything. They lied about the money supply. They lied about unemployment. They lied about the productivity, et cetera, et cetera. But this is typical, and I think you just have to understand that politicians, monetary authorities, that's just the way they've been bred. In fact, Machiavelli said in his book, The Prince, that governments are constituted to lie the greatest number of people the greatest amount of time. Okay, so ignore what the politicians say, but watch closely what they do. What they do, what Bill Clinton does, is much more important than what he says. And I think you'll find in many instances it'll be quite different. The 1990s will witness a tremendous loss of freedom, and that certainly is one of my concerns, and I think many of you in this room. I think there's no group of people in this country that should be more concerned about freedom than Christians. Because if we lose our freedom, we're going to lose the freedom to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And in any case, we're going to talk about some of the aspects of that loss of freedom tonight. Throughout history, the bearer of bad news has been unpopular. In the ancient world, such people were stoned. That doesn't mean they've had drugs. It means that they literally threw stones at them. It was called the shoot the messenger syndrome. Very effective. They never came back with bad news again. To discredit factual arguments of the truth, the political left will attack the man, it will discredit him. In Latin, this is called argumentum ad hominem, argument against the man, attack a man, discredit him, and basically no one will listen to what he has to say. So you will find Christians and conservatives in this country continually tarred and feathered by the political left who want to discredit them, so no one will listen to what they have to say. Hosea 4:6 says, "My people perish from lack of knowledge." I think as we lose our freedom in this country, it will be largely because our people are so ignorant of our Constitution, ignorant of our Christian heritage, and we do have an incredible Christian heritage, which most Americans have forgotten, ignorant of what our position in Christ is, ignorant of why as Christians we are to take a stand against evil, ignorant about the devices and strategies of people who would like to push us into what they very openly now call the New World Order. If we lose our freedom, if we perish, I believe it will be from lack of knowledge, and hopefully that's why meetings like this will begin to proliferate all over the country. Proverbs 27:12 says, "The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it." I want to repeat that because I get a lot of flack from people. I'm in the investment business, and we try to tell people some things to do to get out of harm's way and why they should get out of debt, and we talk about a lot of the things that Larry Burkett talks about getting out of debt, and you know, we talk about maybe having some precious metals and so forth. And I have a lot of Christians come to me and say, "But if you trusted God, you wouldn't think of such things. You would simply sit down and pray." Well, I do like to sit down and pray, and I do hope I trust God, but it does say in Proverbs 27:12, "The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it." I am now convinced that there's a lot more simple than there are prudent. The majority is always wrong. Okay. This is my perspective triangle, and I hope to give you a lot of perspective tonight on the world, at least as I see it, and how some of these things that are happening in our world tie in with maybe Bible prophecy. I see the United States in decline in many ways. First, a monetary economic decline, which is based on the false premise that man can have or create something out of nothing. And we've seen our government run the printing presses for decades now and create a tremendous amount of inflation. And we have seen the biggest debt pyramid explosion in the history of the United States in the last 13 years. Most of it happened under the Republicans. We went from George Washington through Jimmy Carter, which was about 206 years, to go from zero to $3 trillion in total debt, corporate, private, and governmental, and that was by 1980. And in 13 more years, we went from $3 trillion to $16 trillion, a 550% increase in 13 years over what it took in the previous 206 years. And that debt pyramid is now coming unglued, and I believe that we are moving towards a major depression. And I do agree with Harry Figge, who wrote an excellent book, and I'm going to talk about this in my talk tomorrow morning. I don't have time to talk about it tonight, but if you haven't read Harry Figge's book, you ought to get it. It's called Bankruptcy 1995, The Coming Collapse of America and How to Stop It. And he basically shows why the financial system will probably collapse in this country before 1995 or not much later than 1995. Excellent book, co-chairman of the Grace Commission, well worth reading. I believe America is watching the implosion of the debt pyramid. We had 1 million Americans go bankrupt last year, including a lot of Christians who ignored what the Bible had to say about debt. We had 101,000 corporations go down last year. We've had some 2,000 banks and a couple thousand savings and loans go down in recent years. We saw General Motors lose $22 billion last year, and nobody even blinked, and Wall Street went up on the announcement. Incredible. $22 billion. That's the greatest loss of any company in the history of the world. Greatest losses than all the combined losses of the automobile industry since Henry Ford, and nobody even blinked. Okay, tomorrow I'm going to come back and we're going to talk a good deal about the economic system and what you need to do to get out of harm's way, because I believe we're moving into some very, very difficult times. I think there are some constructive things that you can do if you want to try to protect your assets. So I see America in monetary and economic decline, and I think that is going to accelerate dramatically. I see America in social political decline, and that's based on the false premise that all men are equal or can be made equal through redistribution of wealth or through government edict. The great lie of the French Revolution was liberty, equality, fraternity. Okay? What were we told by the socialists of that day? That everyone was equal. Of course, some of the socialists were more equal than others, but that was okay from their viewpoint. But to make everybody equal, they say you need to redistribute the wealth, you need to play Robin Hood and take from the rich, take from the earners, the workers, the producers, and give to the non-producers. And, of course, put controls on the greedy business people and other people who can't be left alone to control themselves. And that's what socialism is all about. And I believe today that America is plunging towards socialism. I see a tremendous number of aspects that remind me of some of the police state activities that were going on in Nazi Germany in the 1930s and the Soviet Union in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and I'm going to touch on that some tonight. We are seeing more socialistic legislation and controls over every aspect of the American people's lives coming down the pike than we've ever seen in the history of this country, and it has accelerated 5 or 10-fold since Bill and Hillary Clinton hit the White House. Okay? We are plunging, in my opinion, towards a socialist America, and we are plunging towards something called the New World Order. Now, we've heard a lot in recent years about this so-called New World Order. What is the New World Order? Well, George Bush talked about it a couple of hundred times while he was president. Here we have Business Week talking about on the threshold of a new order. Here we see Mr. Bush and Gorbachev, front page of Time magazine, talking about building a new world. They really weren't the beginners. I think it was talked about some in the 1930s. Fidel Castro talked about the New World Order, demanded one when he was at the United Nations in 1979. Here Time magazine tells us that we are entering a new world. Gorbachev seeks a partnership to build a new world order. What in the world is this new world order? It is a world government. A world government under the United Nations. Now, this is what they say, the establishment people, who I believe dominate this country and our government and most of our media, and indeed much of Western Europe, et cetera, et cetera. They say that we will have a world government. They say they can deliver us to this world government by the year 2000. This world government will be replete with a one world currency and a one world central bank, which is then to give way to a cashless society where all of us will be run through the computerized credit card or banking system, where every single move we make financially and therefore in our lives can be monitored and tracked. And that's not all that far away. Much of that will be in place within the next 3 to 5 to 7 years. Okay, the New World Order crowd believe that we should have a one world economic planning, a one world family planning, or population control. Population control, you see how that works with abortion. You see how that works over in Red China, where the baby girls are for the most part killed, or many of them are killed. One world economic or one world environmental control, so we can have a global environmental protection agency. All of this is to be held together by a United Nations Army, which they very openly now call the New World Army. Here's an article from the New York Times, March 6, 1992, talking about the New World Army. They talk about it quite a bit. It's a United Nations Army, which is to be made up of troops from a lot of different countries, including the United States. And you notice that American troops are now serving under United Nations commanders over in Somalia. That's the first time in our history that that's ever happened. There are now more and more United Nations troops being trained on U.S. soil at U.S. bases and so forth. But the New World Order crowd says we've got to have this UN Army to kind of keep the New World Order moving along and on track, and maybe to stamp out the opposition to it. And for starters, it should have 100,000 troops and then move quickly to 250,000. Okay, there are other aspects to the New World Order. They see the cornerstone of the New World Order being the merger of the common interests of the United States and the Soviet Union. He said, do we have common interests? Well, I'm not aware of what they are in particular, except that we are getting the gospel into the Soviet Union now, and that's very positive. I think that will change. I think the door is beginning to close right now, and I think within the next year or two you will see the door close against Christians and a new crackdown come as the communists reassert themselves in a reborn, or born again, if you will, Russia, Mother Russia, Commonwealth of Independent States, call it what you want. Okay, let's just talk for a few minutes about communism, because indeed I think it's not dead, but it is a major part of the New World Order. They see us kind of merging ourselves with the communist world. Unless we think communism is dead, we need to remember that 1/3 of the world's land mass and about 1/3 of the world's population is still under the control of communism. In Russia, there are still some 4 million people in some 1,900 Soviet slave labor camps. The gulags were never shut down, even though we're told communism is dead. In Red China, there are something like 10 million people in some 3,000 slave labor camps. Those have not been shut down. Communism in the last decade killed over 1.5 million people down in Afghanistan. They're about to take over. Within the next 3 to 6 to 9 months, the communists are going to take over in the Republic of South Africa. They're working hard on the Philippines. They're reasserting themselves in Central America. through the Sandinistas down in Nicaragua. Beware when people tell you something's dead and maybe it's not really dead. Okay? Now, here's what Newsweek said. Super Partners, an ambitious game plan for a new era. Here again, Super Partners as Mr. Gorbachev, Mr. Bush shake hands at the summit over in Malta. The emerging U.S.-Soviet alliance, isn't it a wonderful thing? It's such a wonderful thing that, in fact, in recent years, if you'd have gone up to Alaska, you would have seen this in state parks. They've changed the flag now, but you would see the Alaskan flag, the American flag, and the Soviet flag very openly flying. They've now changed their flag, but they still fly it up there. Okay, I'm sure some of you are junk food freaks and like McDonald's, so when you go to the McDonald's up in Juneau, Alaska, you'll find the Russian or the Soviet flag flying next to the American flag and flying next to the Alaskan flag. Why not? After all, if we're partners, if we're friends, if we're all going to merge together in this new world order, why not? I'm sure you all got your postage stamps last year that show the astronauts. Here's the NASA and the Russian astronaut reaching out to touch someone, just like the telephone company ad says. And of course, here's the Sputnik, or the satellites, the Russian and American satellites sailing off into the sunset together. I'm sure you got those stamps. Here we go. Here's a map. It's far from accurate, it says. This is an ad from Archer Daniels Midland, one of the large multinational corporations that has very, very large interests in the Soviet Union. And it shows Russia and America kind of snuggled up with one another. This map is far from accurate, but it does serve to illustrate a very important point. As trade between the USSR and the U.S. expands, we're growing closer and closer together. Well, indeed we are. And so I will then ask you the question, is communism really dead? I contend that it is not. Vladimir Lenin said, we advance through retreat. That is a Machiavellian concept that most Americans can't understand. You see, when I'm your enemy and I keep coming at you and I come in your face and I'm right at your throat, you are on guard. You are prepared. You back up. You have your adrenaline starts to pump. But when suddenly I protest peace and I talk about how I'm your friend and I begin to lay down my arms, or at least I appear to, and I appear to be in major retreat, what happens? You relax. This is a strategic doctrine that the communists have understood and practiced for many years. They really didn't get it on their own. They got it from Sun Tzu, who wrote a nifty little book, if you want to read it, called The Art of War. He wrote it in 500 BC. It is a military manual for the Soviet High Command, military high command, as well as the Nazi high command during the war, etc. And Sun Tzu, one of many things he said, was, when at your pinnacle of strength, feign weakness. Now you say, well, wait a minute. Come on, McAlvany. The Russians aren't at their pinnacle of strength. They are an economic basket case. True, they are an economic basket case. When did they start being an economic basket case? In 1917. Okay? They've been an economic basket case for about 80 years. How come they never went out of business? If you and I had run our business like they run their country, we'd have been out of business a long time ago, because the West, especially America, has periodically and continually come in and built them up with massive injections of financial aid, high-tech aid, industrial aid, et cetera, et cetera. No, they will not, and probably never will be, at their pinnacle of economic strength, but the Russians are still at their pinnacle of military strength. They have not dismantled the Red Army, and this no one seems to want to talk about. I've got a good friend named Sir General Walter Walker. He used to be the head of NATO's Northern Command, and he and I commiserate with letters back and forth all the time, and a few of my friends in NATO and NATO intelligence and so forth. The communists didn't dismantle their military. They're supposed to be broken out of business, but they're building one new nuclear submarine every 33 days. $3 billion a copy, 12 a year, $36 billion a year. Not bad when you're broke, poverty-stricken, and you love peace, okay? And they're still building about 3,500 new T-80 main battle tanks a year, about 700 fighter planes a year, about 50 bombers, between 350 and 400 intercontinental ballistic missiles a year. What in the world is going on? I thought they were protesting peace. I thought they were broke. How do they do it? I don't know. Yes, some of their missiles have fallen into the hands of the republics, and yes, they probably don't have total control over all of their missiles, but still pointing at the United States. We lovers of peace should know, are approximately 12,000 missiles with 30,000 warheads, and at least half to two-thirds of those are still under the control of the Russian Red Army. Okay, why haven't they redeployed those? Why haven't they destroyed those? Why are they still pointing them at us? Why are they upgrading them? Why are they adding new ones to them? I don't know. I don't know. It's very strange. It seems very, very strangely inconsistent. When at your pinnacle of strength, feign weakness. That's what Sun Tzu said. Glasnost perestroika was described to us as this period of tremendous peace this period where we would all get together and it would just be a wonderful period. They would lay down their arms. They would move to democracy. They would move to free markets. They would move to free elections. And we've been led to believe that this is what's happening. And yes, they have relaxed in a lot of ways. And yes, they have let the gospel come in. And I think that's a great thing. But they are about to close the door on the gospel, I believe. In fact, we've seen some early signs of this in the last 30 days. Well, it's easier to understand the present period of glasnost perestroika if we understand that the Russian bear has had 5 other prior periods of glasnost perestroika, one in the 1920s under Lenin, another one under Stalin in the 30s, another one under Stalin in the 40s, under Khrushchev in the 50s, Brezhnev in the 70s, and then Gorbachev started in 1985. In each of these periods of glasnost, they claimed peace. They said they wanted to stop being communist. They wanted to become capitalist just like us if we would simply give them a lot of aid, give them a lot of Western aid, and in the last couple they said if we would also begin to disarm, it would really help them along the way to peace, then they could do the same thing. And in each one of these prior periods of glasnost perestroika, they then changed their mind after a few years, after getting major concessions from the West, cracked down on their own people, started doing their own thing, etc., etc. You need to know the KGB is today stronger than it was 5 years ago. You need to know that the KGB infiltrated more people into the United States, more agents into the United States last year than any time in the last 15 years. My, isn't this surprising? Okay, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about peace. Okay, the 6th period of glasnost started under Gorbachev. It didn't start actually under Gorbachev. It started under Yuri Andropov. He was the head of the KGB for 15 years. In 1980, the Politburo called him in and said, we need a script. We need a script for glasnost number 6. This will be the greatest strategic deception of all. And so he went to work on this, and the KGB helped write the script. And they wrote it in 1981, and they began to implement it in 1985 under Mikhail Gorbachev. And we know a lot about this, and if you want to read about this, get a book called New Lies for Old. I know we got some skeptics in the room. Get a book called New Lies for Old by Anatoly Golitsyn, Golitsyn. Golitsyn was a former major in the KGB. He defected to the West. He wrote a book in 1981 in which he described the script for glasnost number 6, and I'm going to briefly describe it to you in a minute. And he published the book in 84, and these things begin to happen in 1988, 89, 90, and you would say he's a prophet of God. No, he was a major in the KGB, and he had good contacts. And he simply wrote about what the communists were planning to do to deceive the West with glasnost number 6. Okay, now this whole concept of strategic deception is something we do not understand in this country. We are very, very gullible. We don't understand that there are con men in this country. Christians are the easiest people in the world to con, because somehow or other they think everybody's good-natured and honest like them, but our Bible says that everybody's got a sin nature, and we ought to spot the phonies and the con men coming along, but I see a lot of Christians that can't spot a con man. Okay? Strategic deception. Let me give you one classic example from ancient history. There was a 10-year war between the ancient Greeks and the city of Troy, the city-state of Troy, and the war ended up as a Mexican standoff. Nobody won, nobody lost, but one day the Greeks got on their ships and they sailed away. And they said, you're too good for us, we can't beat you, we are going to go home and lick our wounds, it's all over. We want to be your friends in the future, but at this time you are our conquerors, you are the victors, we are the vanquished. And they put all their people and sailed away on the ships. And there was great celebration that night in Troy. And in fact, so sincere were the Greeks that they left a gift outside the city walls of Troy. And they said, bring this gift into your city walls and it will bring you good luck. There were a few people in Troy who said, we don't think this is a very good idea, but they were certainly not part of the majority, and they were voted down. And so that evening they brought in the giant wooden horse. And that night as they locked the gates and everyone went to bed, the Greek soldiers came out of the belly of the Trojan horse, opened the gates, the ships turned around and sailed back, and that night Troy fell, never to rise again. They were annihilated. Classic illustration of strategic deception. Okay, if you read the book, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, you will understand the kind of strategic deception that the communists are capable of perpetrating. The script for glasnost number 6 reads something like this. First, the communists would yield nominal control of Eastern Europe. Nominal, not real control. Then they would superficially encourage the democracy movements in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. You have to understand that every one of the 12 republics is run today, the Russian republics, is run by communists, by people at the KGB that are either KGB or the KGB has placed in position. Okay? open the Iron Curtain, they would tear down the Berlin Wall. These were all things they planned to do in 1980 and 81, and they began to do them in the latter part of the 1980s. They would declare communism, they would allow the reunification of East and West Germany. They would declare communism dead, the Cold War over, and the communist parties of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe irrelevant. Okay? This was all things that they were saying that they were going to do in 1981, and they began to do in 1988 or 89, and it looked like it was just a spontaneous disintegration in the Soviet bloc. Well, let me explain how the pattern of deception has worked in Eastern Europe, and you can find the same pattern elsewhere, for example, in Nicaragua. First, they would purge the old guard hardline communists, and they would bring in lesser-known communists or communist collaborators called reformers. The KGB was in charge of these purges. On Christmas Day of 1989, Nikolai and Elena Ceausescu, the ruthless, hardcore dictators, communist dictators of Romania, were overthrown, put to the wall, and shot within hours. And the world celebrated. Okay? And most people didn't understand the background behind that coup, however, because the coup was launched in Moscow 6 months earlier, when the Politburo called in the heads of the KGB and the GRU, which is Soviet military intelligence, and they said, look, the Ceausescus aren't playing ball. We're trying to project a soft-line, friendly, pro-Western image, and these guys are just not cooperating. They got to go. They got together with people, dissidents in the Romanian military. They put together a coup. The revolution began in the streets, and there was legitimate opposition to the government, obviously. Oh, by the way, one of the first things they did was they set up a front called the New Salvation Front. Some of my Christian friends would probably say that was a group of born-agains, but not true. It was a KGB front. And so when the overthrow finally came, immediately installed in power was the New Salvation Front. And the head of the government was named Ion Iliescu. Most of us never heard of him, but he was the number 3 man in the old Communist Party, and they just made him the new man. They called him a non-communist. They took the secret police called the Securitate. They lopped off the heads of the top 200, which were the Praetorian Guard, if you will, to the Ceausescus, and they then distributed the other 49,800 across the country, changed the names of their organizations, and they're still there, keeping pretty much control over Romania. That's the pattern that they're using in many, if not most, of the European, Eastern European countries. They'll change the name of the Communist Party while declaring communism in that particular country to be dead. They changed the name of the Communist Party in Poland to the Social Democratic Party, and everyone cheered and said, isn't that wonderful? It's just a different name. I mean, it's like suddenly I start calling myself Santa Claus. I mean, a rose by any other name, you know how that goes, okay? Next, they would give birth to the new democratic opposition organizations that are in reality controlled by closet communists and by the KGB. Next, they would hold so-called, they're masters, by the way, at creating their own opposition. At creating their own opposition. And I believe that the establishment people who run the United States today are doing the same thing, and I think they have created a person that they will make the next president of the United States. And I'll come back and touch on that in a few minutes. Next, they hold so-called free elections, which are in reality manipulated and controlled by the communists. Then they announce the termination and dismantling of the secret police, while in actuality reshuffling and reassigning the operatives and keeping the organizations very much alive, but in different forms and with a different name or names. They've renamed the secret police twice and reorganized it twice in the last 5 years, the KGB and the Soviet Union, and today it is bigger than it was 5 years ago, and their folks are pouring into the United States. Why? Because everybody in this country believes communism is dead. By the way, the Communist Party of the USA is flourishing and growing faster than it has grown in the last 40 years right now, because there's no opposition to it. Everybody thinks it's gone. Okay? They use the present period of euphoria, confusion, and chaos in the West to infiltrate tens or hundreds of thousands of secret communist agents into the West. Okay, now, we've seen kind of what the Soviets said they were going to do. What are we supposed to do? What are the Western quid pro quo concessions we're supposed to make? First, America and the West would assume Russia's $40 to $50 billion a year financial burden of Eastern Europe. We've done that. We now have picked up the tab for Eastern Europe. After all, why not? They're all supposed to be non-communist. But what they've done, in many, if not most of the instances, have simply put in second or third echelon communists, and they've called them non-communists. Okay? A reunified Germany would pull out of NATO and become neutral. They changed their mind on that one, and they said, nope, Germany's the anchor of NATO. We'll simply leave Germany in NATO, and we'll just let Germany go neutral, and she'll help neutralize all of NATO, and that's happening right now. American troops will be pulled out of Western Europe, and that's happening. Within 3 or 4 years, the troops will be gone. Under Ronald Reagan, we started pulling our intermediate-range missiles out of Europe. We have now pulled all of our nukes out of Europe. We've pulled all of our intermediate-range missiles out of Europe and destroyed them. By the way, did you see where we destroyed 350 B-52s just in the last couple of weeks? They're destroying them down in the desert, I think, down in Arizona. Incredible. Okay. In any case, American troops will be pulled out of Western Europe. And that's happening, that's in process. Western Europe will move to neutrality and NATO will collapse. I believe that you can forecast that in the next 3 to 5 years very easily. America and the West will massively, if NATO doesn't collapse, it will simply be neutralized and they'll take in some of the Eastern European, supposedly former communist countries. America and the West will massively finance and bail out the Soviet, basket case Soviet economy as it has 5 times since 1921. Remember, this was part of the script they wrote in 1980 and 81. Of course we're doing that. In fact, we had Bill Clinton over in Japan just about a month ago, and he was demanding of our 6 Western industrial trading partners that we all fork up $30 billion just for starters. Maybe they appointed him when he was over there with the KGB in 1970. Maybe they appointed him fundraiser for them when he eventually became president. I don't know. Okay, America and the West would massively disarm in the post-communism, post-Cold War era. Indeed, that is happening. We are massively disarming right now. In fact, they are dismantling our military so fast, it is absolutely unbelievable. They are closing down bases all over the country. How can we do this when the Russians haven't dismantled their military, when nuclear weapons are proliferating all over the world, when Red China is arming like there is literally no tomorrow? How can we be disarming? Who the gods will destroy, they first make mad, someone once said, and I sometimes wonder. Okay, America, according to the script, would discontinue its support for the anti-communist resistance movements around the world. Groups such as UNITA, the Contras, the Mujahideen, we long since discontinued that support. The American troops would be pulled out of South Korea and the Philippines. You may have noted that we closed down Clark Field and Subic Bay over the last 2 or 3 years under George Bush. And there's a lot of talk about pulling our troops out of Korea, although that talk slowed down a little bit in the last year or so as the North Koreans are flexing their muscle and developing nukes. Okay, that was kind of the script. There's a lot of evidence I could give you. I won't take more time to go into this. If you're interested, I've got about a 25, 26-page report on what's really happening in the Soviet Union. I went into a lot of detail. I wrote it about 15 or 18 months ago. It's actually a couple of chapters in the book that I've got out on the table, and I think I would probably still agree with about 98% of what I wrote. Okay, we've seen a lot of headlines like this, the end of the empire. What do they say when the king dies in England? The king is dead. Long live the king. What in the world do they mean? They mean long live the new king. The end of the empire, Russia is reborn. Mother Russia has not gone out of business, nor has Mother Russia disarmed, and you still have powerful communists pulling the strings behind the scenes, and they will reassert, I believe, and I will openly predict here, I believe within the next 2 years, maybe 3 at the outside, and maybe a year and a half, you will see the communists reassert themselves tremendously. You will know that the bad guys are back in power, and at that point, if you have not already seen it, you will see a tremendous crackdown against the Christians, and you will see the closing of the door to the gospel. So the door's open now. I believe it's a temporary window of opportunity. Get the gospel in as fast as possible, but understand that no good thing necessarily lasts forever. Here's a picture which I think is worth 1,000 words. Here's Mikhail Gorbachev over at the Sea of Galilee. Mikhail Gorbachev's a powerful guy in this whole New World Order scheme, and you will hear more of him as you will hear more of George Bush, I believe. Here he is over the Sea of Galilee recently with the dove of peace on his head and on his hand. Isn't that interesting? You just got to kind of think of the imagery of that and so forth. It's really kind of interesting. Now, if you think communism is dead, I want you to just note what happens to people still in Red China. It is still happening. This is how they execute you in China if you're a Christian and you cross them. They put a rope around your neck, they kneel you, and it just takes one bullet in the back of the head, and there you are. Ask the children or the teenagers or the young people, the 10,000 that died at Tiananmen Square, if communism is dead. It is not dead. It is just changing its colors, its names, its strategies, and its tactics. It's called the war called peace. The Soviets are securing their eastern and western flanks, that is Western Europe on the west by neutralizing NATO, Eastern Europe by or China on the east by moving towards a non-aggression pact with China, which is about 98% negotiated, and indeed they are China's largest arms supplier now. Great enemies, right? Well, not hardly. They're supplying them with arms. As they neutralize their eastern and western flanks, they plan to move sometime before the latter part of the 1990s down into the Persian Gulf. He who controls the Persian Gulf oil fields and those reserves controls the world, and the Russians know it. Their strategic planners have known it for decades, and they have never given up interest in that, and they plan to form an alliance with the radical Islamic world And of course, Israel is down there and is not very popular with those folks. Okay? Soviets have seduced America and the West in disarming while massively arming themselves in preparation for war in the mid to late 1990s. Okay? The Old Testament prophet Jeremiah warned to beware when men cry, peace, peace, and there is no peace. The 1 Thessalonians 5:3 warns that they will cry peace and safety, and then sudden destruction comes upon them. What are they calling today? They're saying we live in a great era of peace, even though we've got 52 wars floating around. Okay, I mentioned that part of the cornerstone, or the cornerstone of the New World Order, was the merger of the common interest of the United States and the Soviet Union. Okay, but there's more to it. Remember John Anderson? Some of you remember him. He ran for president as an independent back in 1980. Well, here's what... In fact, we even have one John Anderson fan back there. It might be John Anderson's mother, I don't know. John Anderson, in the spirit of United Nations Day, John Anderson, 1980 presidential candidate, asked for your support for a UN World Federation. World peace requires world laws. Global problems require global governance. Join the John Andersons now in working to transform the United Nations into an empowered democratic world federation. The global parliament to enact laws to protect the Earth's environment, a standing peacekeeping force, an arbitral system to prevent wars, the International Criminal Court to bring terrorists to trial. And unfortunately, they're beginning to define, as per the Crime Control Bill of 1993, which I'll define for you later on this evening or early tomorrow morning, they're beginning to define honest, law-abiding citizens as terrorists. Okay? Anyway, here's John Anderson calling for world government. Now, a few more aspects, elements of the New World Order. The New World Order has three major regional governments. The first regional government is over in Western Europe. Okay? Now, we know that in Europe we've had for years the European Economic Community. It gave way on the last day of last year to the United States of Western Europe, made up of 12 nations. If you go to Europe today, you'll find these posters around Europe and a lot of other variations of same. Europe, many tongues, one voice. Okay, what is this a picture of in the middle? Tower of Babel. We know it's the Tower of Babel because there was a picture of there was a painting by a 16th century Flemish artist called the Tower of Babel, except it didn't have a little crane on it. Okay? Now, what are these? I'll give you a hint. These represent, this is an old poster. This has 11. There's now 12. These represent the 11, now 12 nations in the United States of Western Europe. What are those? Are those stars? No. Those are not stars. Those are Baphomets. That's like the satanic goat heads. That is a satanic symbol, okay? Those are the horns. That's the chin. That's not the same as a star. The star has 1 point up and 2 down, okay? You see, the United States of Western Europe is not only a major part of the New World Order, but the United States of Western Europe is run by socialists out of Brussels, Belgium, and it is basically run by socialists long since infiltrated by the KGB. And one of the most important aspects of these people is that many of the top leaders are totally 100% into the occult. Okay? Now, as we saw in Nazi Germany, we are seeing in Europe today, and we are seeing in this whole New World Order push, there is an occultic, supernatural, satanic dynamic or dimension to it. And a lot of people missed that about Nazi Germany. They didn't realize that the Nazi Germany and the Fourth Reich was not primarily a political movement. It was primarily a supernatural movement. Okay? So that's the United States of Western Europe. That's the first of the regional governments. The second of the regional governments in the New World Order is NACOM, the North American Common Market. Okay? That's to be made up of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It is like Europe, the European Economic Community, to be started out as an economic union and then to become a political union. And the goal is to eventually eliminate the borders between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And that's what NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, launched by George Bush last year, is all about. It will basically open up our borders economically and to the people and so forth, and eventually there won't be much reason to have political divisions. And so that is to be the second major regional government in the New World Order. Okay, now, they believe that also part of the New World Order is the division of America into regional governments. And there was legislation put on the books during the Nixon years in 1972 that basically set up the future dispensation of regional government in America. There are 10 of these regional governments. If you live in Colorado, then you're in region number 8. If you live in Texas, you're in region 6. If you live in California, you're in region number 9. Now, they'll have a hard time pushing through regional government in the United States until or unless they get rid of the U.S. Constitution. Watch out for con. It's a con job. That's supposed to be the Constitutional Convention. They say we need it to get a balanced budget amendment. We have many laws on the books forcing politicians to balance the budget. They ignore them. The real plan behind the Constitutional Convention is to scrap the U.S. Constitution and to put in a new Constitution. In all likelihood, it's already been written. It's called the New States Constitution. It was probably written over 10 years ago, and it does call for regional government and a merge of the United States into a world government, which they now popularly call the New World Order. They really can't do regional government until they make a major overhaul or a complete removal of the U.S. Constitution. So watch out for the efforts to move us towards a Constitutional Convention. I think it may not happen under Bill Clinton. I think it may happen under the next president. Okay? Now, the third major regional government of the New World Order is headquartered in Tokyo in Japan, including many of the tiger countries out in the Pacific Rim. And then there are more sub-regional, junior regional governments down in, envisioned, if you will, down in Latin America, in Africa, in the Middle East, in the Southeast Pacific, et cetera, et cetera. A major part of this thrust towards the New World Order and towards a socialist America is to use environmentalism as a vehicle. Red is out. It's not in vogue. It's not politically correct anymore to talk about communism, but it is politically correct to talk about environmentalism. So what the socialists and the communists and the New World Order crowd couldn't get through under the banner of Marxism-Leninism or the hammer and the sickle, they're now trying to get through under the green banner of environmentalism. Okay, now I'm not an environmentalist, but I am for clean air. I hate Los Angeles. I was just out in Los Angeles 4 days ago, and my gosh, the smog! I was choking on the smog, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think most of us with common sense are for clean water and clean air. Let me tell you something. These guys have gone way beyond common sense. They have found a way to regulate every aspect of our business, of our lives, of our private property, all under the guise of cleaning up the environment. But that's not what it's all about at all. It's about socializing America. Now, maybe you remember the Earth Summit. The Earth Summit took place down in Rio last summer. Some of you are aware of it. The Earth Summit was the biggest environmental clam bake in the history of the world. 160 heads of state were down there. You had George Bush was down there. Our delegation was headed by Senator, now Vice President Al Gore. You had the leading New World Order folks down there. You had the leading New Agers down there. You had the leading occultists down there. Communists were down there. I mean, it was a motley crew. Okay? And now, I think it's important to know who spearheaded that. It was sponsored by the United Nations, but it was spearheaded by a man named Maurice Strong, and you need to remember that name, Maurice Strong. He is a very, very powerful man. He's a Canadian billionaire who is a high official in the United Nations, and he organized and spearheaded the meeting. He has organized a little group over in Crestone, Colorado, in a place called the Baca Grande in the San Luis Valley. Okay, not all that far from here. It is probably, if you could find a New Age headquarters for the world, it's probably over there. You've got the Shirley MacLaines and the John Denvers and the Dalai Lamas of the world out there. They're building ziggurats. They're building some kind of a giant Babylonian-type pyramid that's supposed to be 445 stories high. You've got the Kissingers and the Rockefellers and many of the establishment elites, the globalist elites are out there regularly building homes, et cetera, et cetera. So remember that place and remember that name, Maurice Strong. The New World Order is going to use environmentalism as a major vehicle. Now, do you all know who this little lady is? This little lady is not the man in the moon or his mother. This is indeed Mother Gaia. Mother Gaia is the goddess of planet Earth. And you see, if you get far enough into the environmentalism, into the deep ecology, you will find out it is completely occultic. Okay? I don't know what she really is. Maybe she's a demon. But in any case, you have to understand a very, very occultic dimension to this whole environmental movement. Okay? Now, George Bush talked about a new age of promise. George Bush talked a lot about strange things. Remember when he talked about 1,000 points of light? In fact, he talked about 1,000 points of light a whole bunch. And the first time I heard him say that, I was taken aback. What does he mean? I've never heard of that. You know, what a cute little thing to say. 1,000 points of light was lifted directly from the writings of Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey was an occultist who lived in this country, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 decades ago. It also comes from the first line of a New Age mantra which calls for the Lord Maitreya to come to planet Earth. That's not the Jesus Christ of the Bible that many of us are hoping will come back before the speech is over, maybe before the break, so we don't have to sit through the rest of this incredible evening. when George Bush talked about 1,000 points of light, I mean, that was a very clear message to all New Agers in the world that his 1,000 points of light was basically, you know, well, this is all part of the group. Okay? If you look at the New World Order then, on one side of the coin is the political move towards a world government, and they promise us that world government by the year 2000. That is only 6.5 years away, ladies and gentlemen. And the other side of that coin is the New Age movement. That is the occultic dimension to it, and you will find that many of the top leaders in the New World Order crowd are New World Order on the political side, they're New Age or occultic on the other side. So what we're looking at here is not just a political move towards world government, we are looking at also an occultic move, a satanic move. Now, I'll leave it to you if these things may have any prophetic implications. I think indeed they probably do. Welcome to the global village. It will be wonderful, except for one thing. You Christians may not fit in. You may not fit into the New Age very well. We know you have some very strange thoughts. In fact, it's been rumored in the last 3 or 4 months that many of you are dangerous religious cultists. And I want to tell you, that's what they're beginning to call Christians and Christian groups right now in the wake of Operation Waco. And so there could be some people who just don't fit very well into this whole system. Okay, we're talking about the social political decline of America, and this is just all kind of the warm-up. I'm going to come back and expand on that tonight. But let's move on down to the spiritual decline. Because the real reason America is in decline on a monetary, economic, social, political basis is because of the spiritual decline. And this is based on the abandonment of our spiritual, God-centered heritage and a switch to a man-centered culture that excludes God, Jesus Christ, the Bible, heaven and hell, and most absolutes. Prosperity has caused us to forget God and our dependence upon Him. Now, I'm not saying that probably speaks for most of you in this room, or you probably wouldn't be at this meeting, but I think it speaks for many Americans and indeed many people who call themselves Christians today. Okay, Alexander Solzhenitsyn was asked on BBC television some years ago, why did the Russian people lose their freedom? And he thought for a minute, and he said, because we forgot God. I think 50 years, almost 50 years of prosperity, 48 years since the end of World War II, has made us fat, dumb, and lazy. And as a people, we've kind of forgotten where we came from. Okay, and as the Christian church in America, the salt, has lost its savor, we have seen our country move into political decline, economic decline, social decline. Look at what's happened to our country in just a decade, and not a decade, but in just a generation. Christians can no longer engage in religious expression in public or even in public school system because they're told it's unconstitutional. Perverts and homosexual deviants are paraded in the media, in the halls of Congress, in our new administration with the protection and encouragement of the government, the courts, and our top leaders. There were actually 15 homosexuals in the transition team, and it is widely believed that there are 3 or 4 homosexuals in the cabinet today. Okay? We see headlines like this. Gay rights. On Sunday, gay men, lesbians, their families, and friends take to the streets of Washington. This was April 26. So like so many other seekers of equality have before, on the long road from the political fringe to the mainstream. I think we're going to be the ones that are going to be on the political fringe before this is all over. Okay? 1993 March on Washington for gay, lesbian, and bi equal rights and liberation. 300,000 people, I understand, showed up. Gays seek place and table. You can't ignore us, say marchers. Well, I'm probably right. We probably can't ignore them. D.C., largest gay city in the world for a while. Marchers gave gay rights a face. 300,000 rally for gay rights. Obviously, the gays are in. It is politically correct in America today to be homosexual. And if you believe what the Bible says about homosexuality and what God says about what an abomination it is, you are politically incorrect and you are in grave danger of committing a hate crime, and that will be ratified into law probably within the next 1 to 2 years. And if you teach your children what the Bible says about homosexuality, then not only is it a hate crime, but that could be defined, according to new legislation coming along, as a dangerous kind of child abuse, criminal child abuse. So, unfortunately, they are politically correct today, and you are politically incorrect. Here's a couple of them. They were kind of getting a little suntan at the thing. They're well dressed. I noted that Bill didn't have any people at this meeting who were dressed like that. I wonder why. In any case, the taking of human life. We're talking about what's happened in America in just a generation. Most of you, many of you people are old enough to remember what it was like to grow up in the 40s and 50s. I grew up in the 1940s. I was born in the 1940s. Can you see the incredible change that's taken place in our country? In the last generation, in the last 2 generations, does it not make you want to weep? Do you know that our children don't even know what it was like to live in a really free country? Okay? In a generation, we've seen the taking of human life by abortion now over 30 million in just 2 decades. It's condoned by government, paid for and defended with tax dollars, and rationalized as simply the free choice elimination of an unwanted fetus instead of the murder of a human baby. Widespread euthanasia will follow. Politicians are so concerned with racial, sexual, deviant, and alien rights that they enact hate laws to protect perverts and minorities from any criticism or restrictions by the majority. And if we make any criticism, then we are the bad guys, and we are about to become the criminals. A member of Congress can run a homosexual brothel from the nation's capital and still be reelected to office. The media can broadcast sitcoms that would make a pig blush, and taxpayers sponsor a national endowment for the arts to create decadent filth. A politician who supported, aided, and abetted America's enemy throughout the Vietnam War, in a better day that would have been called high treason, and who has openly flaunted at least 19 extramarital affairs, is elected President of the United States by an electorate who understands his sordid background and who doesn't even care. A secretary of the government's largest department, Health and Human Services, spearheads an aggressive safe-sex program designed to saturate Americans' children from kindergarten through high school with their immoral sexual propaganda, and most parents barely take notice. As Italian Communist Party founder Antonio Gramsci strategized, if the morality and culture of a society can be destroyed, that society can be easily brought down in a communist revolution. Has our morality and our culture, what's happened to our morality and our culture in this country? I think they've definitely gone down the tank. If you want to give an idea of what's happened to our morality and culture, who is the most popular and best paid woman in America? Madonna. $60 million. I don't know if that makes her the most popular, but I would think somebody likes her. $60 million this sweet young thing made last year. Okay? Who is the most popular and the best paid man in America? He's been in the headlines in the last couple of days, as a matter of fact. Michael Jackson. There he is with your president. Okay? How many of you caught Michael Jackson at the Super Bowl, on the Super Bowl thing? Weren't you proud? That was beamed around to, I guess, I don't know how many billions of people around the world. They got to see American culture right up hand. Are you proud that we now export our culture all over the world? We set the standard for the world. Let me show you the kind of standard we are setting for the world. Here's some of our rock artists. Does it make you proud that we're sending these kinds of people out and their music all over the world today? Here's a few more. In fact, they go on and on. This one I really like. Something else. These are the kids that many of our teenagers are worshiping in this country. How far culturally, how far morally, how far spiritually have we fallen? Do you know that I know tons of Christian families that let their children listen to this kind of hard rock? A lot of these guys are from Metallica. You know, these guys are preaching Satanism. They're preaching suicide. They're preaching sex, drugs, rebellion. They're preaching necrophilia and all kinds of incredible stuff. And there's Christian families all over the country allow their children to listen to this garbage. And you wonder why Christians are not standing up and turning this country around. Here's a few more. You know, these guys are really something else. These guys are making millions. Most of us are poverty-stricken compared to these folks. Okay, and if you listen to their music, you probably wouldn't understand most of the words, but I can tell you it is demonic, it is satanic, it is wicked, but it is symptomatic of our culture. I dare you, if you still have a television, and you probably shouldn't, I dare you to go home and watch an hour of MTV. Pick any hour of the week and watch it, and you will practically throw up. You will see sex, you will see perversion, you will see rebellion, you will see Satanism, you will see all kinds of stuff, and you can pick any hour. Here's one of these young men. What is that signal he's giving? What is it? Some people, well, you might say it's hook 'em horns if he went to the University of Texas. Other people would say that represents other kinds of horns, a satanic symbol, etc., etc. So watch that hand motion very carefully. You'll see it from time to time. In fact, Whoopi, who is this giving the same hand motion? That's your president giving the hand motion during the inaugural address. You know, I was at the University of Texas, and we did this for hook 'em horns, but you know, that's not a natural, if you're waving at a crowd, that's not a real natural thing. You really got to work at putting your fingers down. I wonder what in the world he was trying to do doing that. In any case, our culture is obviously in tremendous decline. Do you know what this is? This is a church. There were 50 churches burned in an 18-month period down in Florida. And I think this is part of the wave that is coming. We are going to see a tremendous wave of persecution in this country. Okay, we've been talking about the cultural decline. We've been talking about the spiritual decline of America. Why is all this taking place? Why does America today find itself in a free fall? What happened? What happened to our country in just the last generation or two? And a lot of you are old enough to remember when our country wasn't like this. How many of you can remember when our country was a whole lot different? Okay? I can remember. A lot of us can. Okay, I see four basic reasons why this incredible decline or free fall has taken place. First of all, powerful liberals, secular humanists, socialists, and perhaps even communists have intentionally subverted our traditional way of life, our morals and culture, primarily via the media and public education in order to bring America down and ultimately to merge it into a world government via the Antonio Gramsci strategy. Second, Americans have become fat, dumb, and lazy after 50 years of uninterrupted prosperity, and that probably even describes a few of us. You know, good times don't breed character, strong character. Tough times bred character. What kind of backbone did the average American have? What kind of character did we have during World War II, World War I, during the Great Depression? These were tough times, and we pulled together, and our people had character, and they had strong faith. What in the world happened to it in just a couple of generations? I don't know about you, but I feel like weeping for my country. I love my country, and what they've done, what these people have done to our country, it angers me, and I think we need to turn it around. Maybe this is all the prelude to the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But in any case, have we ever seen some change? The third reason is almost 40 years of a steady diet of television. The average American family watches between 40 and 50 hours of television a week in this country, or I guess a month. No, I'm sorry, a week. A week. They watch many, many hours every day. Now, what kind of garbage is there on television? I mean, my gosh. I mean, they used to say, Life magazine was designed for people with an 8th grade mentality. I mean, what is television designed for? For people with a moronic mentality. I mean, the content of these programs is just incredible. You know, it's funny. My wife and I made a decision. When we got married, we said we will never watch television. We will not ever watch TV, and we never have. So I guess you might say, well, we're uneducated bumpkins because we don't know what's happening in the world. Television is used, I think, to manipulate the American psyche, and I think it is very much controlled by the establishment people who want to move us towards this new world order. There's only 4 major networks: ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN. There's a handful of newspaper chains, a half a dozen newspaper chains in this country. There's about 4 major newspaper syndicates. They control, all of those control maybe 3 major news magazines, Newsweek, Newsweek, Time Magazine, U.S. News. That controls about 97% of the information the average American gets, and they're all controlled by a very narrow group of establishment people who are part of this clique that want to push us towards this new world order. Now, I had a friend one time that visited with a woman named Bella Dodd. Bella Dodd had been head of the Communist Party. Not head of the Communist Party. She had been on the National Committee of the Communist Party back during, I think it was during the 1950s. Late 40s, early 50s. Bella Dodd was also she was the head of the New York State Teachers Union. Okay, interesting that she would share those 2 positions. She said to this friend of mine, long after she left the party, she, I think, became a Christian, and she's dead now. She said, we communists consider television to be one of the most valuable tools in the conquest of America. And my friend said, oh, you mean all the propaganda? All the propaganda that, all the twisting of the news, the distortion. And she said, yeah, we do all that. By the way, you want to read an interesting book, put a parentheses here, an interesting book. It's called Target America, the story of the Soviet penetration of the U.S. media. It's written by a man named James Tyson. He's a very respected intelligence background, Target America. And he describes in his book, he believes that there are approximately 2,000 KGB agents working within the media in the United States. Okay? I have a friend, he died this past January, General George Keegan, who used to be head of U.S. Air Force Intelligence, a brilliant man, a great patriot. George and I were having dinner in Atlanta one time, and I said, George, how many KGB agents are there in the United States today? And he thought for a minute, and he said approximately 50,000. That was his number, not mine, okay? Well, this book, Target America, says about 2,000 of them work within the media. But Bella Dodd said, no, that's not it. We got our people in there. We got our people who toe the line, etc. So that's not it. We saw television as a medium whereby a whole generation, and now it's 2 of Americans, would sit passively being entertained with their minds in neutral. And she said, why that was happening, we planned to quietly come in and take over their country. Boy, howdy, when this guy said that to me, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't know if you watch a lot of television or if you know a lot of people who have, but if you watch a great deal of television, your mind will become like mashed potatoes, and you will not be able to think very deeply. I don't know if that laugh over there means that you watched a lot of television or this woman is simply into mashed potatoes, but in any case, That's not where you want to be. That is not where you want to be. Okay? I have seen people who are great thinkers, deep thinkers, discerners, and they started watching a lot of television. Of course, it's addictive, and they simply lost their ability to discern and think. So turn off your television. I actually know a family that they had a ceremony. They got into this concept, and they took their television in the backyard. And the father got out there with a .357 Magnum, and they prayed and they sang, and he plugged it about 6 times right in the screen, and they dug a hole and they buried it. And I love it. I keep a TV because I like to play old videotapes for my kids and show them old movies of what our country used to be like. But I kind of like that idea of the ceremony with the TV set, so that's not basically a recommendation. Okay, remember I showed you the picture of the churches that were burning. I think you need to understand that we are on the verge of the beginning of persecution of the church in the United States. There are Christians that are already being persecuted. There was a church in LaPorte, Colorado that was closed down because the pastor took a stand against the pro-homosexual ordinance. He took a stand against it, and his church was completely closed down. I know pastors who have been imprisoned. I know Christians who have been imprisoned. I know conservatives who are speaking out. Certainly you know pro-lifers and people who are standing out, are taking a stand against the killing of the unborn who are being jailed. And there are more and more incredible laws coming down via the Crime Control Bill of 1993, which is not just an anti-criminal bill, and a lot of other laws that are coming along that are basically going to be used, I believe, against Christians in this country. Okay, I don't know how many of you have read this book. I don't really recommend it, except you need to know what they're saying. It's called When Time Shall Be No More, Prophecy Belief in Modern American Culture. It's written by a guy named Paul Boyer. He is a very liberal professor of history at the University of Wisconsin. It is published by Harvard Press, the not-so-conservative publishing house. And basically what this book does is it analyzes the Christian evangelical fundamental prophetic movement in the country. Hal Lindsey, I don't know if he's here tonight. He may be sleeping. I think he was pretty tired when he came in. But Hal Lindsey would be very flattered. He's got a lot of information in here. Only it's not flattering, but he's in there. Virtually every leader in the Christian movement in this country is treated in here in great detail. And the conclusions of this book are that the greatest danger, the greatest threat to America and its continuing survival are the fundamental evangelical born-again Christians. You Christians are behind the Cold War. You Christians are behind the arms race. You Christians are behind the crime in the streets. You are behind poverty. You fundamentalist Christians are behind virtually every problem, disease in this country. You're behind child abuse. You're behind homophobia. You are very, very dangerous people. You are trying to take over the government of the United States. And just as the people didn't notice how dangerous the Nazis were until they were in power, so we have this great lurking danger in the United States of America, and it's you fundamental Christians. Now you say, well, what's a book? I mean, this is just a book. There's thousands of books written. What's in a book is that this guy is being quoted all over the country by the establishment press. When they want to talk about we Christians and describe us as dangerous religious cultists, they quote from this Boyer book, and it's just like they do in Russia. In Russia, if they want to have a change in policy, the Politburo will get some of its intellectuals to write a couple of books that articulate a new policy, and then they let those books kind of percolate down through the system, the trickle-down thing, if you will, for a couple of years, and then boom, before you know it, they built the foundation for changing and making a major policy change. And I believe that that's what this book is, and it's a very dangerous book, and I think I recommend you get it. You'll be nauseated, but you need to get it and you need to read it, because I think this book will set the philosophical base for the coming persecution of the Christian church in the United States of America. Now, right after the first attack down in Waco, Texas, when the Branch Davidians were attacked by the government agents, about 100 of them, within 2 days, the New York Times came out and other establishment publications, and they began to ask the question, how can you recognize sincerely, how can we recognize the dangerous religious cultists? After all, we see these dangerous religious cultists down in Waco, and I don't know whether they were dangerous religious cultists. They probably had a lot of kooky beliefs. I'm not sure they deserved to die for those beliefs, but I'm sure they had some probably weird beliefs. But how do you recognize a dangerous religious cultist? The establishment press began to ask, and they said, these are people who study their Bibles all the time. They're fanatics on their Bibles. They're fanatics on Bible prophecy. They're all hung up about the return of Jesus Christ. These people are homeschoolers. They actually take their kids out of the public schools and teach them at home. These are child abusers. They spank their kids under the guise that spare the rod, spoil the child. Some of them have guns. Some of them believe in survival food. These are religious fanatics, and these are dangerous religious cultists. Now, does that sound like anybody you know? Does that describe anybody you know? Okay, right after the burning of Waco, and I'm going to touch on that in a little bit because I think there's some very strange things that deserve some real hard questions to be asked about what happened in Waco. But right after that, there was an article 2 days later in USA Today, Experts Weighing How to Deal with Cults in the Future. Okay, and I'll just read you an excerpt from this USA Today. Is that an establishment publication? Article. Okay, it says, today the group, it's talking about how do we recognize these groups of cultists, okay? Today these groups tend to be believe that the Bible predicts the end of the world is near. In the past decade, we've had a sharp upsurge in interest in Bible prophecy, said historian Paul Boyer, author of a study, When Time Shall Be No More. Boyer said that such seemingly unrelated events as the Israelis gaining control of Jerusalem in 1967, the threat of nuclear war, and shifts in the global economy are seen as signs the cultists see. Oh, wait a minute, what did he say? Seen as signs that the cultists see that as prophesied in the Bible, the end is near and Jesus Christ will return. If you believe that the end is near, that Jesus Christ will return in the not-too-distant future, you have just been redefined by USA Today, the New York Times, by this guy, and by the establishment as dangerous religious cultists. And after all, we got a bad example in Waco of what can happen to dangerous religious cultists. I believe we're on the verge of seeing a tremendous amount of persecution of the Christian church in the United States of America. You know what? In case you hadn't figured this out, there's a lot of folks out there that don't like us, born-again, evangelical, fundamental Christians. The New Agers hate us. The New Agers understand that we may not adapt once the age of Aquarius dawns upon us. And the New World Order crowd don't like Christians. And the environmentalists think that you guys are trashing the economy. After all, your Bible says to go out and subdue the earth, and they say that means trash the planet. And it says go out and repopulate the earth, go out and be productive and multiply, and they say you're overpopulating the planet. The homosexuals sure don't like us for what our Bible says about their lifestyle. The women's livers, I mean, they sure don't like us. The abortionists, they can't stand us. The secular humanists hate us. Let me tell you something, in case you haven't noticed, our culture, our post-Christian culture, as Francis Schaeffer called it, is turning dramatically and rapidly against Christians, and especially born-again evangelical Christians. And I believe within 3 to 5 years, it's very possible that we will be forced into an underground church situation, that many of us will be meeting in home churches. And if we want to maintain and practice our faith as we have in decades and generations past, that we may be functioning on more or less an underground basis, and that the churches that are allowed to remain in the open, that have not had their tax-exempt status revoked, or have not been closed down for saying things that are anti-government, those churches will be towing the line and will be as spiritually dead as most of the open churches, above-ground churches, have been in Russia and the Eastern Bloc countries in the last 20 to 30 years. I would strongly encourage you, therefore, to start reading as many books as you can about the underground church in Eastern Europe, in Russia, and so forth. And there's a number of them around. Many of you have read Richard Warrenbrandt's book on Tortured for Christ. A friend of mine, Dmitri Duduman, wrote one called Through the Fire, and there's many more. I think you better learn how these people defined and honed and refined their faith and how they lived when they were no longer popular, and where the establishment in those communist countries literally hated them and wanted to stamp them out because of their faith. Because I believe that's our future in the next 3 to 5 years. I hope I'm wrong. I believe that is what is being set. The stage for that is being set in our country right now. Okay, that was kind of my introduction, and that a very brief introduction. And I would guess that applause means, why don't you just kind of pretend like that's the end and sit down and let's go out. And before we finish tonight, you may wish that you had remained in hometown America, wherever that is. I'm going to give you a lot of heavy information tonight. And basically, I've basically given you the lightweight stuff. We're going to get a little heavier as we go along now. Okay? Let's talk about your worst nightmare, the reality of the Clinton co-presidency. And maybe it's not your worst nightmare, but it's my worst nightmare, and I'm sorry. That's the problem I have. Are you trying to tell me that I've got about 15 minutes left? I know that I'm watching my climb. 10 minutes, so I'll go fast. Okay, I'm sorry. I've gone slow so far. We now speed up. The reality of the Clinton co-presidency. I'm sure that many of you in this room voted for Hillary because she is co-president, and somebody must have voted for her, didn't they? I mean, how did that happen? Bill and Hillary are actually low-ranking employees of the liberal Eastern establishment, as expendable as Jimmy Carter or George Bush. I believe that America is run by an establishment group. Some people would say they go back as far as the Illuminati, which started in 1776, May 1st. By the way, do you know what the Satanic High Day is? It is not Halloween. That's a high day. It's not the high day. The Satanic High Day is May 1st. It is called Beltane, okay? That was the day of the French, I don't know if the French Revolution, but it was the day of the kickoff of the Russian Revolution. It was the day of the kickoff of the Illuminati, et cetera, et cetera. Some people think that this movement towards world government goes all the way back to the Illuminati. It was a group of Satan worshipers. They started out among the very wealthy in Europe. They decided they would control central banks, the financial systems in Europe, and eventually all over the world, and they would eventually bring about world government. In any case, whether it's them or someone just like them, today in the United States you have groups like the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations. You have in Europe, you have the Bilderbergers, the Club of Rome, the Socialist International, the Fabian Socialist, and these are globalists. These are people who believe in world government, and they're very open about their belief in world government. They're very open about the fact that they can establish it by the year 2000, 6.5 short years away. Now, it's important to know that both George Bush and Bill Clinton came from these groups. Bill Clinton and George Bush both belong to the Bilderbergers, the Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission, and the Council on Foreign Relations. And I believe that these people, by and large, dominate both of the major political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. In fact, I call them Socialist Party A and Socialist Party B. I think they essentially compete with one another to see who can tax us the most, spend the most, control us the most, and right now Socialist Party B is in, and they're trying to outdo Socialist Party A. And by the way, the biggest push for the New World Order didn't come from the Democrats. It came from George Bush, who, if you didn't notice, was a Republican. Okay? These people, though, they're not calling the shots. There's powerful people behind the scenes that are calling the shots, and but they certainly have some willing employees, if you will, in Bill and Hillary. The establishment agenda for Bill and Hillary are as follows. The homosexualization of America, vastly expanded abortion rights, domestically and internationally. By the way, 15 homosexuals in the transition team. It's estimated 3 to 4 in the cabinet itself. By the way, these are the Clintons, in case you've forgotten what they look like. Some of you maybe got rid of your television and don't know who's president of the United States now, so they're the presidents of the United States, plural. Vastly expanded government regulations and control over every aspect of our lives. This is the agenda the establishment has coming out of this so-called New World Order and the socialist America that is coming. Expansion of environmental controls is a vehicle for socialization of America. If you haven't read this nasty little book, you probably ought to read it. Earth in the Balance, Ecology and the Human Spirit by then Senator Al Gore. It is not just about environmentalism, it is about the New Age plan for socializing America and the world. It is an incredible New Age document as well as environmental document. Okay, so expansion of environmental controls is a vehicle for the socialization of America. Expansion of the size, power, and influence of the United Nations and its UN World Army. The disarming of the American people via gun control. That is coming like a gigantic juggernaut. It is incredible what is coming. They are building a propaganda blitz right now to go for gun control, and I truly believe that that's what the original onslaught by the government against the folks down in Waco was all about. Those folks had a lot of guns. They had about 2 guns per adult. I know a lot of hunters and gun collectors that got a lot more than 2 guns per adult in their home. But when they went down there, I think the whole idea was to drag all these people out in handcuffs and drag all these guns out, and that's why they called the press in, and of course it backfired because somebody shot back at somebody somewhere along the line. I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of gun control coming, and in fact, if you look at the gun control laws of 1968 and the 14 that are now floating around in the halls of Congress, you will find incredible parallels and similarities between those gun control laws and the gun control laws in Nazi Germany that were passed in 1928 and again in 1938. Okay, we're moving rapidly towards gun control. We're seeing a sharp increase in taxes for the middle and upper income Americans and businesses. To be exact, somewhere between $300 and $350 billion in tax increases. I'll touch on that maybe tomorrow morning. The biggest tax increases in U.S. history, and I think they will help push the United States into the depression we talked about earlier. Establishment of a socialized medicine system. That one's going to be left up to Hillary. She's in charge of that one. The sodomization, disarmament, and dismantling of the U.S. military. I don't know if any of you guys in this room served in the U.S. military, or maybe you gals, but I did. I was in the Air Force. And, you know, I love my country, and I love my military, and I had a lot of friends. I didn't go to Vietnam, but I had a lot of friends go to Vietnam and die in Vietnam. And I'll tell you what, it angers me to see the U.S. military sodomized. It really angers me. I know what it's going to do to the morale. That's not a politically correct position these days, but boy, I'll tell you what. If you're a red-blooded American man or woman, that ought to just really make you mad. What is that going to do to the morale? You talk to any top military people in this country, and they'll tell you what it's going to do to the morale of our country. Okay, by the way, here's a picture of the head of our military right now, Bill Clinton. Here he is with George McGovern when he was campaigning for McGovern. This was shortly after he came back from his anti-war activities in London and Moscow while he was campaigning for George McGovern. You know, he went over in 1970. It's estimated that he spent about 2 weeks on the tab, or hosted by the KGB, back in 1970 while our boys were fighting and dying in Vietnam, and some of them were being tortured in Vietnam prisoner of war camps, and this guy was over collaborating with the enemy. My. By the way, no extra charge for this. The new head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff appointed this week is a Russian. And I got friends all over Washington that say, we never heard of this guy. Who is this guy? And why is there a major gap in his background that nobody seems to be able to account for? I don't know what that means. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But it is strange. Anyway, but there's a lot of strange things about what's going on back there. Okay. Part of the agenda is the delivery of South Africa to the African National Congress and Nicaragua back to the Sandinistas. The communists are about to take over in South Africa. I've been down to South Africa 35 times. I love those people. I speak in a lot of the black townships down there, and they are about to be handed over to the communists, and it is very, very sad indeed. By the way, you want to get a good book with a lot of great essays on gays in the military and why it's a bad deal. Gays in the Military, the Moral and Strategic Crisis. It's got things by D. James Kennedy and Howie Phillips and a lot of really good people. Okay? Rapprochement with the communists in Cuba, part of the agenda. Okay, the leftist lineup of the Clinton administration. Most of the top echelon of the Clinton administration are members of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. The top 35 members of the administration belong to the, including the entire cabinet, belong either to the CFR, the Trilateral Commission, the Leftist Institute for International Economics, the Leftist Institute for Policy Studies, the Leftist Legal Services Corporation, or a part of the Harvard, Yale, Princeton elite, or some combination of these. The administration has been staffed with Carter-era foreign policy leftists, socialist disarmament freaks, women's livers, homosexuals, radical abortionists, and environmentalists. This is lots of fun, isn't it? The new Clinton administration is far and away the most left-wing administration in U.S. history. There were 15 open homosexuals on the Clinton transition team and 3 or 4 more homosexuals in the cabinet, most of them selected by Hillary. Clinton's coordinator for education, arts, labor, and humanities is Janetta Cole, an active long-term supporter of Fidel Castro, a member of the Communist Front, the Vincent Ermos Brigade, and its subfront, the Committee to Stop U.S. Aggression Against Cuba. Members of these groups were trained by the Cuban DGI, which is Cuban intelligence. This gal holds a very high position in that administration. Clinton has brought back the Carter Foreign Policy team, people like Warren Christopher, Tony Lake, Peter Tarnoff, the current director of the FBI, or the CFR until just recently, Frank Wisner, Cyrus Vance, Samuel Berger, Madeleine Albright, and dozens more who were responsible for the overthrow of the Shah of Iran, the installation of Khomeini, the overthrow of Ian Smith, and the installation of the communist Mugabe regime in Rhodesia, now called Zimbabwe, who helped overthrow Somoza and install the communist Sandinistas in Nicaragua, who supported the communist MPLA in Angola, the communist Frelimo in Mozambique, and the communist ANC in South Africa. This is the Carter Foreign Policy team, and I'm about to run out of time, so I'm going to have to stop short here. Who overthrew the pro-Western Pinochet government in Chile, who gave the Panama Canal, and who opened the door to massive KGB, GRU, and DGI penetration of the U.S. Those foreign policy positions not filled by Carter people, been filled by Kissinger and Rockefeller Associates. America now has the most dangerous foreign policy team and domestic policy team in U.S. history. Okay, I've got to stop for a break, and I'm going to come back in a minute, and I've given you the good news, and we're going to talk about the bad news. Okay, and I'll just leave that on. You can kind of contemplate her. Maybe for you, she's good news. I don't know. Maybe you're really excited about our co-president. We'll talk about her, and we'll talk about a number of other things. We'll give you the parallels between the United States and Nazi Germany and some other things which I think you need to know. So we'll stop now for a 15-minute break. Stretch your legs. If necessary, run screaming from the room. Go outside. Get sick if you have to. Pray. Sing a hymn, and then come back, and we'll start again in 15 minutes. Thank you. Thank you.
You can obtain additional unedited conference tapes on audio or video, including the full conference set, individual speakers, or conference highlights. 90 minutes of the strongest comments by all 4 speakers. Call 1-800-886-8852 to place your order. All major credit cards are welcome. For additional information regarding newsletters and books, contact Don McAlvany at 800-525-9556. For information on future Stealing the Mind conferences, write Stealing the Mind of America, P.O. Box 10,000-150, Vail, Colorado, 81658, or call area code 303-949-4347. The opinions expressed in the preceding program are those of the speakers.